Okay, so here's 4 quick EKGs. We're just going to go through this simple system on the left. Rate. So we want to know the patient's rate. Are they slow, fast, or normal? So in class, we learned this method where you start with a QRS complex that starts on a thick line. So here's one right here. So we zoom in. Oops. We zoom in, and then we're going to start counting big boxes until we see the next QRS. So here's the start. 300, 150, 100, just past it. So, and this would be 75. So this is 100, this is 75. This is roughly 90, okay? So this is roughly 90 beats per minute, which is normal. Our range of normal, there's normal. Roughly 90 beats per minute. So the rhythm, we want to know if it's regular or irregular. Look at the RR interval. There's the space between the QRSs, right? There, 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 there. Now we're just eyeballing it, but you can measure it out if you want to. It's roughly the same all the way through. So this is regular. It also could be irregular, and there's 2 types of irregular. There could be irregularly irregular, or regularly irregular. We're going to see one soon that has irregularly irregular rhythm. And I'll explain what the regularly irregular is then too. So this is regular. There's even spacing between the beats. So axis, let's calculate the axis. So what is the axis? The axis is right here. It's the direction of the electricity. That's it. It's the average direction of the electricity. So what we're going to do is we're going to come down here. So we're going to look at this. 1 has a positive deflection, right? So what that means is measuring from 1, the electrical activity is coming towards it, okay? So what we can do is we know it's not going away from it. If it was going away from it, then the vector or the QRS would be negative. But in lead 1, it's all positive. It's a tiny bit of negative at the end. So we know that it's generally going to be on this half of the circle, okay? So we can already rule out right axis deviation. For sure not going to have right axis deviation if they have a positive QRS and lead 1. They could have left axis deviation, and it could be normal, okay? So what do we do now? We know it's on this side of the circle, but what about if it's on this side of the circle? So completely ignore this. We know it's positive. It's going towards 1. It's on this right half of the circle. But now we got to know if it's in the top right quadrant or the bottom right quadrant. Likely it's in the bottom right quadrant and it's normal, okay? So let's go down here and check. So we look at AVF. It's positive. It's only positive, right? Okay, so let's go up here. So this is AVF. So it's all positive towards AVS. AVF. So according to AVF, it has to be somewhere in these 2 circles. We know it's not on this side though, so it's not on this right here. So we know that it has to be in this grid right here. So it's going, the positive wave in 1 shows us that it's on this half of the circle. The positive wave in AVF shows that's on this half of the circle, but it has to be in both halves. So we know it's somewhere in here. So the axis is going to be normal. And you can do other things to calculate the exact axis if you want, but it's unnecessary for what we're doing now. So they have a normal axis. So the P waves, let's look at them. Lecture today was talking about how 2 or 1 is the best to see the P waves. It for sure is. So here in lead 1 and 2, you can see the P waves, QRS, T wave, P wave, QRS, T wave, P wave, QRS, T wave. So every QRS is preceded by a P wave. Every P wave is followed by a QRS. They're in normal amplitude. They all look the same. There's no like fibrillation. You can see them clearly. So they have normal P waves. So normal P waves. And they're not upside down. They're not after the QRS or anything weird like that. So this is likely sinus. Okay, so at this point, we can say that it's normal sinus rhythm. I hate that word. Okay, so next, PR interval. So this is what we're looking for like AV blocks. Like first degree AV block would be a lengthened PR interval. It can get really short in conditions like Wolff-Parkinson-White. So it's important. So if we zoom and find a nice P wave that we like, let's start here. So if you look, it starts roughly on the second little box. It's kind of blurry. So it starts roughly on the beginning of the second little box. So we got one little box, 2 little box, 3 little box, 4 little box. So it's 4 little boxes. So each little box is 0.04 seconds or 40 milliseconds times 4. It's 160, which is good. So normal PR interval. So no first degree AV block. So then the QRS. So what are we looking at the QRS? We want to know if it's narrow or wide. Narrow or wide. So normal, I believe, is 90 to 120 milliseconds. If it's above that, it's wide. If it's below that, it is narrow. Or sorry, if it's within that, we consider it like narrow complex. It doesn't really usually get much lower than 90. I know it can, but if you say narrow complex, that's good. That's what you want. So this is definitely not wide. We find a QRS that we can measure. Pretty much any of them you can measure. Let's just do V4 just because we can. So if you look right there, again, it's kind of a blurry image, but this one starts on the big line and it ends about 2 boxes in, maybe 3 boxes, no, about 2.5 boxes in or so. And I believe it's 80 to 120 is normal. Somebody looked that up and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's either 80 to 120 or 90 to 120. But anyways, this is within normal limits. So this is a normal narrow complex QRS. So normal, we're going to say narrow complex, which is good. We just say normal QRS. Normal QRS. ST segments. So we're looking for elevations or depressions. So this patient doesn't have any ST elevations or depressions. The ST segment is between the end of the QRS, which is the J point, and the beginning of the T wave. So yeah, it kind of goes up here, but that's normal. It's just the beginning of the T wave. There's no elevation above baseline, which is this TP segment, or you can use a PR segment, but typically use the TP segment. It's basically on line with it. Same here, same here, same here, everywhere. You gotta check every lead, but there's no ST depressions or elevations that are significant at all. And we'll talk more about that tomorrow in lecture, I'm sure, when we talk about ischemic changes. And then T-wave, finally, you're looking to see if they're peaked. You're looking to see if they're huge and broad, if they're inverted. All of these are normal. You don't want them to be way bigger than the QRS complex. That's called a hyperacute T-wave. That's bad. So these are all normal size QRSs. None of them are inverted. This is fine. So this is just a general way of looking at it. So what we've gathered is that the rate is normal. It's a regular rate. There's a normal axis. The P waves, QRS, and T waves are all normal. So this is essentially just a normal sinus rhythm and a normal EKG. So next, same system. We're just going to go with a different EKG. So rate, what do we see? Well, one thing here is that, yeah, you can calculate the rate, but the problem here is that, is this rhythm regular or irregular? It's irregular. Irregular. It's not regular. If you look at this RR interval, there's like 4.5 boxes. Here there's 3. Here there's 4. Here there's 3. Here there's 4.5 again. Here there's like 3, 4. So if you look at this, if you felt this patient's pulse, you would feel boom, 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 boom. It would be all over the place. Not necessarily fast or slow, but irregular. So this is irregularly irregular. So regularly irregular would be where it's irregular, like, but there's a pattern to it. So there's a thing called bigeminy, which would be like if you're feeling the patient's pulse, boop, boop, pause, boom, boom, pause. I'm not talking about heart sounds. I'm talking about actual pulse. So there's like pauses in it, but there's a pattern to it. That's regularly irregular. This, there is no pattern to it. It's irregular. It's irregularly irregular. Rate. So with an irregularly irregular rhythm, depending on which RR intervals you look at, it's going to be different. If you use it here, 300, 150, 100, it'd be 100 or slightly tachycardic. If you did it here, it would be normal. If there was a bigger space, it might even be bradycardic. But if you look at this whole 10-second EKG and multiply it by 6, that's probably going to be your best average. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. There's 13 beats in 10 seconds times 6. That's like 78 or 80. So this is normal rate. Normal rate. And AFib can vary a little bit, but I just kind of just gave away the answer. But if you look at the P waves, you don't really see any. So let's look at lead 1 and 2. Do you see any P waves? No. So all you see is like little quivers. There's no definite P waves before the QRSs. You can look at every single lead. There aren't any. Interesting about AFib in V1 and V2, since they're like right next to the atria, you can sometimes see like quivering, almost like what VFib would look like with ventricles. So this is basically fibrillation waves that you're seeing through here. It almost looks like artifact. It kind of is. It's just electrical activity picked up by the atria while they're quivering. So this is going to be AFib. Also, the PR interval, we don't have to calculate it because there isn't a P wave to calculate. QRS, It's a narrow complex QRS. ST segments, there's no ST segment elevations or depressions, and the T waves all are upright and in line with the QRS. They're kind of hard to see here, but it doesn't really matter. There's no T wave abnormalities that are worth saying. So this is going to be atrial fibrillation, or AFib is a better way to say it, or easier way to say it. 2 more EKGs and we'll be done. So this one right here is a fun one. So rate. I said calculate rate first, but it's also good to be keeping an eye on whether it is regular or not. So if you look here, you see these gaps. Just keeping it simple, you see gaps. So it's not necessarily regular. It's going to be hard to calculate the rate using our little system. So since there's not a whole lot of beats, you can imagine if there's like 30 beats, it'd be hard to calculate all of them and then multiply by 6. There's only a few, so let's do it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 times 6. The rate is about 66. And then rhythm. So this is an example of regularly irregular. So this is not a regular rhythm because there's gaps, right? But this is going to have some pattern to it. So if you felt the patient's pulse, you would feel beat, 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 pause, beat, 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 pause. So that is a pattern, but it's not regular either. So it is regularly irregular. So the axis, I know we didn't do axis on the last one, but it's fine. So let's do axis here. So we have positive, tiny little guy in 1. We have a positive in 2, and we have positive in 3. So it's basically positive in all of these. So if it's positive in 1, 2, and AVF, we can assume it's normal. Let's just show you again. So if it's positive in 1, it's going to be on this half of the circle because we know the vector is somewhere going towards 1, which means it has to be over here. It's positive in 2, which means it's this 180 degrees. So now we've narrowed it down to this area, right? We know it's on this half. We know it's on this half of the 2, which means it's somewhere in here, which means it's normal. So we don't even have to look any further. We could also look at AVF, which means it's positive as well. So we can even narrow this further and say that his axis is somewhere between 0 and 90 degrees. Hopefully that makes sense. It doesn't, just let me know. So normal axis, P waves. So this is where it gets important. So let's look at the P waves. Let's look at 2 as our rhythm strip down here. Looks normal, looks normal, looks normal, looks normal, looks normal, looks normal. So the P wave morphology is normal, normal P wave morphology. But there's something interesting that's wrong. So PR interval, let's look at that. This is where it's important. This is why we have a system. So PR interval, let's not worry about calculating it. Let's just look at what it looks like. So between the start of the P wave and the QRS, it's that long. And this one looks longer. This one looks about the same, or maybe a little bit longer. This is a little bit longer. And then we have a P wave, no QRS, and then a pause. And then it restarts. P wave, increasing P wave, increasing PR, increasing PR, P, no QRS. And then it keeps resetting itself. So this is an increasing PR interval, which equals what? Mobitz 1, which equals second degree AV block type 1. And what's the fun name for it? Winky Bach. Okay, so this is a Winky Bach. That's the takeaway from it. QRSs, they're all narrow complex. They look fine. There's nothing weird about it. There's no bundle branch flocks. No. You can also get like electrolyte abnormalities, like severe hyperkalemia can cause the QRS to widen and eventually cause cardiac arrest. ST segments, a tiny bit of elevation here, but it's nothing concerning. So don't worry about that. But as far as I can tell, there's no like ST segment changes that are worrisome here. And then T waves, they're a little big here. They're like half or more the size of the QRS, but so this might be a little concerning for ischemia. There's a tiny bit of ST elevation with some kind of big T waves, but that's not something I would make the call on. So next one and the last one is a good transition into our. This is a good transition into our lecture tomorrow on ischemic changes. So hopefully something stands out to you about what is wrong with this. You don't have to know exactly what it is, but something is very bad with this EKG. Hopefully it at least stands out to you that it looks weird. So rate, just calculate it real quick. We can use our method we learned. Let's use this one right here because it starts on a black bar. So 300, 150, 100, 75, 60. So it's roughly 60, right? So roughly 60. Remember, it could be like 65, it could be like 59, but it's roughly 60. An estimation we're doing here. So rate is 60. So far, it's not bradycardic, it's not tachycardic. Rhythm, is it regular? Look at the RR intervals. Yes, it's regular. We're eyeballing it, but there's very little difference, if at all, between the QRSs. This is regular rhythm. Axis. Okay, so the thing is, if these are all upright, which they are, it's normal axis. Don't worry about the axis here. So normal axis, P waves. So for P waves, down here in 2, P wave before the QRS, P wave before the QRS, P wave before the QRS. There's a P wave before every QRS, and the P waves look normal. So the P waves are not the problem here. P waves normal. PR interval, if we look, it's starting basically on the black box there, and it ends basically on the black box. So it's like 200. So borderline first degree, but it's not a first degree unless it's over 200. So you'd have to measure that with calipers or on a computer or something. I don't care about doing that right now. Let's just say it's like roughly 200. 120 to 200 is normal, remember. If it was over 200, it'd be a first degree AV block. Okay, QRS. Now, this is kind of weird because you have these changes here, we can call them, and that can alter your QRS interpretation a little bit. So let's look over here at V5, about the only normal lead on this entire freaking EKG. So it looks like a normal wave. If you just looked at V5, you'd be like, oh, this person's fine, no big deal. P wave is fine, QRS is fine, T wave, it looks okay. And it's narrow, no problem. QRS is cool. QRS, it's fine, no big deal. ST segment. This is the important one. I'm sure we're going to talk about this a ton tomorrow for ischemia. ST segment is crucial for interpreting ischemia. ST segment changes are bad, usually. So, what do you see here? Look for ST elevation. Okay, remember, ST is between the end of the QRS and the beginning of the T wave. Okay, so let's look at 2, 3, and AVF. We go to the very top. 2, 3, and AVF are looking up at the heart from the bottom. So you're looking at this part of the myocardium, essentially the right ventricle and part of the septum, and very little of the left ventricle, okay? So that's inferior. Remember that acronym SALI I told you? 2, 3 AVF, inferior. V1, V2, let's start over, SALI. V1, V2, septal portion of the heart. V3, V4, anterior portion of the heart. V5, V6, lateral. 1 AVL, high lateral. 2, 3 AVF, inferior. So we have ST elevation, pretty massive ST elevation, in 2, 3, and AVF. Bad, very bad. That means that there is active ischemia going on in the inferior portion of the heart, which is supplied by what? The inferior portion, or the right ventricle, is supplied by the RCA, right coronary artery. So there's some sort of occlusion in the right coronary artery, most likely. Now, if 2, 3, and AVF are infarcting, this part of the heart's infarcting right here. What is opposite of that? This part of the heart. So 2, 3, and AVF are electrically opposite to 1 and AVL. Inferior is opposite to high lateral. Inferior, 2, 3 AVF is opposite to high lateral, 1 and AVL. So when you look on the EKG, 2, 3 AVF are the inferior portions. 1 and AVL are electrically opposite. If you look at AVL especially, it's essentially a mirror image of 2. Okay? Essentially a mirror image of 3. If you took this EKG on a piece of paper, you put it upside down and looked at it through light, you would see ST elevations, right? This is essentially mimicking 3. Let's look at the axis again, one more time. 3 is essentially directly opposite of AVL. It's 30 degrees off, but you know what I mean. It's electrically opposite of AVL. So the vector is going the opposite direction away from it. So they're going to be essentially electrically opposite on most EKGs. Okay, so this person is having an inferior STEMI, we're calling it ST elevation myocardial infarction, inferior STEMI. Now, one last thing about this EKG is that there are ST depressions in the anterior leads, or the septal anterior leads. So if, I don't have the access to show you the V1 through 6, but imagine where you're putting these in the patient's chest. These are going on the left sternal border, in between V3 and V4. Essentially, you're going over the septum and the anterior part of the left ventricle. So what supplies that? The LAD. So if you had ST elevations in here, you'd be worried about the LAD, the left anterior descending artery, but you have ST depressions. So what what is the opposite of the anterior part of the heart? The posterior part of the heart. Okay, so if you have ST depressions here in the anterior leads, you assume that in the posterior leads, which you can do a posterior EKG with V7 through 9 on the backside of the heart. You assume that the backside of the heart is infarcting as well, because ST depression is reciprocal to ST elevation, which indicates ischemia. So if the inferior portion of the heart is ischemic, and this is reciprocal to the posterior portion of the heart being ischemic, you have, it's right here, infero posterior STEMI, which means that the right coronary artery has an occlusion in it because it's blocking the right coronary artery supplying the inferior portion of the heart, and it's also blocking downstream the posterior descending artery, I believe it's called, which supplies the backside of the heart. Most people are right dominant, which means the posterior portion of the heart is supplied, or most of it is supplied by the right coronary. Some people are left dominant, so they probably wouldn't have these changes. But we're kind of going a little bit too much into it, and we're sure we're going to cover this and a lot more tomorrow. But hopefully this was a good little run through of stuff we might not have covered today. Axis is probably the most confusing. If you have any questions about like Einthoven's triangle or the axis, hit me up. I can show you different ways to calculate it and try to make sense fit in different ways. If you have any questions about interpretation, I'll do my best to help you. So yeah, that's it. Hopefully this was helpful. See you guys later.